Welcome back. Now the news in detail. We begin from China, which has accused Indian troops of a deliberate provocation over the deadly clash at a disputed Himalayan border. Foreign Ministry spokesman Li Jianchao said the Indian troops had crossed into Chinese territory and attacked, triggering fierce physical conflicts. But he did not give details of any Chinese casualties. Li Jian said Indian forces made provocations in an attempt to unilaterally change the status quo of controlled management. He said the Chinese border troops were compelled to take necessary measures to respond to the situation on the ground. Rejecting India's claim, Li Jian said the Galvan Valley is located on the Chinese side of the line of actual control. 20 Indian soldiers were killed in the clash in the Galvan Valley. Now, India's opposition parties have strongly criticized Prime Minister Modi over the government's failure during a standoff with China in Ladakh. A day after the all-parties conference, prominent opposition leader Rahul Gandhi says Modi has surrendered Indian territory to China. In a tweet, Gandhi asked Modi to tell why and where Indian soldiers were killed. Shiv Sena's deputy leader Priyanka Chaturvedi said the centre must respond to China's claim over Galvan Valley's sovereignty. Modi is facing strong criticism after killing of 20 Indian soldiers during a clash with Chinese forces in Ladakh. It was the biggest military confrontation between India and China in over 5 decades. The number of COVID-19 cases in Brazil has crossed 1 million after a record 54,771 new infections were reported in the past 24 hours. The death toll in the country is nearing 49,000 with 1,206 fatalities overnight. In the United States, 678 more people have died, taking the toll to over 119,000. Globally, the death toll has exceeded 459,000, while the infections have crossed 8.6 million. More details in this report.
The coronavirus cases are accelerating, especially in the regions of America, South Asia, and Middle East. Mexico's death toll has surpassed 20,000 after 647 new fatalities, while it recorded over 5,000 cases in the last 24 hours. Authorities in Mexico City have delayed a planned reopening of the economy. In the U.S., Oklahoma's Supreme Court has rejected a petition asking everyone to wear a face mask at President Donald Trump's rally in Tulsa this week. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has warned the world is in a dangerous phase of the virus and must follow precautions.
The world is in a new and dangerous phase. Many people are understandably fed up with being at home. Countries are understandably eager to open up their societies and economies. But the virus is still spreading fast. It is still deadly.
Over in Italy, the National Institute of Health says sewage water from 2 cities contained coronavirus traces in December, long before the country's first confirmed cases. In the UK, chief medical officers have agreed to lower the COVID-19 threat level 1 notch.
The COVID-19 alert level across the United Kingdom has moved down from level 4 to level 3, as recommended by the Joint Biosecurity Centre. The chief medical officers for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have reviewed the evidence and agree with this recommendation.
Elsewhere, South Korea has reported a record 67 overnight cases in about 3 weeks. Officials say 31 of the new cases came from overseas, while the rest were locally infected. Meanwhile, China's capital Beijing has recorded a further drop in new infections as tightened measures to contain the spread remain in place.
Now, Pakistan has recorded its highest single-day deaths as 153 people died from the coronavirus in the past 24 hours, raising the tally to 3,382. The Health Ministry said 6,604 new cases have been reported since yesterday, bringing the total count to over 171,000. The ministry said over 63,500 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far, while there are nearly 104,800 active cases in the country. It said the province of Sindh has reported over 65,000 cases, while Punjab has reported over 64,000 cases so far. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has announced to partially open the country's airspace for international flights. Khan said the decision is being taken for the well-being of overseas Pakistanis who are stuck abroad due to the pandemic. Now, India has recorded its biggest single-day surge in coronavirus cases with over 14,500 infections reported overnight. The new cases have taken India's total number of infections to over 395,000. India has now become the 8th worst hit country as its death toll rose by 375 to nearly 13,000. Officials say there are over 168,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. They said the recovery rate from the virus in it at 54.12%. The health ministry says major cities like Delhi, Mumbai and Chennai are badly affected. Moving on, the Taliban say they are committed to the Doha peace deal signed with the US in February. This comes after CENTCOM Commander General Kenneth McKenzie said the US has fulfilled its obligations by reducing its troops in Afghanistan to 8,600. In an interview, the group's spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid said the US should not be concerned as the Taliban were committed to the deal. He said Afghanistan's soil will not be used against anyone anymore. Earlier, General McKenzie said a full US withdrawal from Afghanistan will happen if conditions are right. As part of the deal, the Taliban agreed they will not allow any violent group to use Afghan territory to plan or carry out attacks on the US. The February deal calls for all US and foreign troops to withdraw from Afghanistan by mid-2021. Pakistan says durable peace in Afghanistan is important to a respectable return of Afghan refugees to their homeland. In a message on the World Refugees Days, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said Pakistan has been generously hosting millions of Afghan refugees for decades. Qureshi said Pakistan renews its call for adherence to the principle of global burden and responsibility sharing. He said the World Refugee Day is a yearly reminder of the importance of peace, prevention and resolution of conflicts. Qureshi said the devastating impact of COVID-19 has compounded the vulnerabilities of those already displaced by violence and conflict. The foreign minister said Pakistan looks forward to a positive response to the UNHCR's appeal for Afghan refugees and host communities in Pakistan. Now, Iran has criticized the UK, France and Germany for their opposition to the lifting of a UN arms embargo set to expire in October. In a tweet, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the E3 must stop public face-saving and admit their failure to fulfill the nuclear deal duties. Zarif described the E3 as accessories to the US and Israel. He said the European powers have failed to fulfill their own JCPOA duties due to total impotence in resisting the US bullying. Zarif said Iran has always behaved with full transparency with the UN nuclear watchdog. Earlier, foreign ministers from Germany, France and the UK said Iran's nuclear program and ballistic missile tests remain a serious concern for Europe. The three countries also opposed the planned lifting of the UN arms embargo. Now, in Libya, the UN-recognized government says it will boycott talks on the Libyan conflict being held by Arab League next week. The video conference talks were called for by Egypt, a key supporter of the renegade commander Khalifa Haftar. In a statement, Foreign Minister Mohammed Tahir Siala said the planned meeting would merely deepen the rift between Arab states. Siala said there had been no prior consultation with his government and said the meeting's virtual format is not suitable to address the issues. The government of National Accord has been in the dominance since its Turkish-backed forces defeated a year-long offensive by Haftar's troops. Libya has been mired in chaos since the 2011 uprising that toppled and later killed longtime dictator Muammar Gaddafi. Russia says many Western politicians mistakenly believe that Washington can rule the entire world. In an interview, Director of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Narishkin, said any country that tries to rule the world all by itself will end in disaster. Recalling World War II's lessons, Narishkin said there are ongoing attempts to distort the public opinion about wartime events. He said many young people from Western countries believe that the US on its own defeated Nazi Germany and liberated Europe. Last month, the White House published a video of a memorial with an inscription saying the US and the UK defeated Nazism. Russia's foreign ministry said Moscow is outraged by US attempts to belittle the Soviet Union's contribution into the victory over Nazi Germany. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, the Council of the European Union has decided to extend economic sanctions against Russia over the illegal annexation of Crimea. At a news conference, German Chancellor Angela Merkel criticized Russia for not taking sufficient steps to implement the Minsk agreement. Meanwhile, in a statement, Estonia's Foreign Minister Urmas Reinsalu said the decision demonstrates the bloc's unwavering support to Ukraine's integrity. He said violation of international law has consequences for the aggressor. Reinsalu said the move is important as Russia is trying to take advantage of the pandemic to deepen its aggression towards Ukraine. The EU introduced sanctions against Russia after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and the restrictions have been repeatedly expanded since then. China has lamented the human rights chief's remarks on Hong Kong, deeming them improper and interference in Beijing's sovereignty. Earlier, Michelle Bachelet had called for China's new Hong Kong law to comply with human rights obligations.
In a statement, Beijing's mission in Geneva said Bachelet's comments on a national security law violated the principles of the UN Charter. It said the new legislation for Hong Kong falls within the sovereignty of a state. Meanwhile, the EU has passed a resolution to protest the law, saying it will undermine the one country, two systems.
4 more terrorists as part of the operation. Turkey launched Operation Claw Tiger and Claw Eagle this week to ensure the safety of the people and the borders. Meanwhile, thousands have taken to the streets across the United States to demand racial justice on 10th of June holiday that marks the end of slavery in the country. In Washington, D.C., protesters tore down and set ablaze a monument of Confederate General Albert Pike. In Atlanta, protesters marched on the Georgia state capitol while demonstrators gathered outside the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. Over in North Carolina, 2 activists toppled 2 Confederate statues erected on the ground of the state capitol. Meanwhile, 1 of 3 police officers involved in Breonna Taylor shooting is set to be terminated, while the other 2 remain on administrative reassignment. Elsewhere in Oklahoma, veteran civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton criticized President Trump during a rally in Tulsa. Sharpton said Trump failed to address the racial gap in the United States.
The president said he was coming on June 19th. Didn't know it was Juneteenth Day. Well, let me say something. He was born and raised in New York, where 2/3 of New York is black and Latino. So if you didn't know about Juneteenth, it was because you were so insensitive and isolated. If you did know, you were lying. Either way, you're not qualified as someone culturally deficient to address this country as a head of state.
The U.S. President Donald Trump says the proposed mail-in voting poses the biggest threat to his re-election. In an interview, Trump said his campaign's legal efforts to block expanded ballot access could determine his political fate. He said if his campaign loses 3 lawsuits, it will put his re-election chances at risk. Trump also warned the Republican Party not to abandon him, saying the Senate candidate should cast his support base aside at their own peril. The president's remarks come as states across the country are trying to accommodate remote voting due to the coronavirus pandemic. Trump's campaign has long argued that widespread mail-in voting will benefit Democrats and invite fraud. The European Parliament has voted to reaffirm the slogan "Black Lives Matter" while denouncing racism and white supremacy in all its forms. The resolution strongly condemned George Floyd's custodial murder and criticized President Trump for threatening to deploy the army against the protesters. It urged EU capitals to denounce the disproportionate use of force and racist tendencies in law enforcement. The bill also prompted EU institutions to officially acknowledge past injustices and crimes against racial minorities. Earlier, the United Nations Human Rights Council unanimously condemned the acts of police brutality and called for a probe into systemic racism. The resolution called for Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet to prepare a report on systemic racism and police violence. In Mali, large crowds have once again poured onto the streets of Bamako demanding the resignation of President Ibrahim Boubacar. Mali's newly formed alliance of the main opposition parties and civil society groups organized the demonstrations. Protesters demanded political reforms, condemning the president's mishandling of many crises plaguing the country. Demonstrators also sang the national anthem and displayed placards bearing anti-government slogans. Militant violence, a tanking economy and government's alleged corruption have fed anti-Keita sentiments. Thousands of soldiers and civilians have died and hundreds of thousands have fled their homes as violence in the country has increased fivefold since 2016. In business news, several major European investment firms have threatened to pull money out of Brazil over the surging destruction of the Amazon rainforest. The rising threats from investors show how the private sector is taking global action to protect the world's largest rainforest. The firm said they will divest from beef producers, grain traders, and even government bonds in Brazil if no progress is made on the issue. Deforestation of Brazil's Amazon surged to an 11-year high in 2019 and has risen a further 34% in the first 5 months of 2020. The right-wing populist has weakened environmental protections and called for more mining and farming in the Amazon region. However, Brazil's president, Jair Bolsonaro, has shrugged off diplomatic pressure on the matter. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can always follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.